Welcome back to Operation Freedom, folks. I'm Dr. Dave Janda, broadcasting our ancillary bunker link to remain Freedom Bunker in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor, here for you every Sunday from 2 to 5 Eastern, live, 24/7, extra shows, content, guests, analysis, archives to all of our shows at davejanda.com. Stop on by. I am honored to have back with me someone who is, the tip of the spear when it comes to pointing out, educating and empowering every person as it relates to what's happening financially around our country and around the world. He has been demonized by the globalist cult. Why? Because he puts you ahead of the curve. He outlines what's really happening, information you won't get through Fox Business News or CNBS or the Wall Street Journal or Barron's or the business section of the Washington Post or the New York Times. He is far ahead of the curve. And he is one of the very few people that's willing to talk about it in public and thereby help you. Bill Holter, after a lengthy career in financial services, retired in 2006, moved his family out of the United States, which is really great timing considering what was coming in 2007 and 2008. He then returned in 2011 and makes his home in the great state of Texas. He joined Miles Franklin, M-I-L-E-S, Franklin.com, as an associate writer in 2012 and posted commentaries and was there until about 2015. But now he's on his own. He is a precious metals trader and dealer through Miles Franklin, but he's based at BillHolter.com, Bill Holter, Holter.com. For years, he was the partner of someone who was called Mr. Gold, that being the great Jim Sinclair. And Jim passed away in the recent past, and that title of Mr. Gold has been passed on to Bill Holter. He is an individual, as the title infers, an individual who is focused on hard assets. Assets that stand the test of time, in particular during times of trouble. And as I've outlined to you, the syndicate has rigged this financial building, if you call it, to implode on its own footprint. If that sounds familiar, so be it. But that's what they've done. And you need to protect yourself. And the guy who's been telling you how to do that for years and what's coming is Bill Holter. Bill, welcome back to the Operation Freedom show and platform.
Thanks, Dave. Nice to be back.
So, Bill, is that an overstatement that the financial, if you will, structure of the world has been rigged to blow, and this is exactly how the syndicate wants it because they've pre-positioned themselves so that as the building comes down, they will gain more power, control, and more financial resources? Is that an overstatement?
No, not at all. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but that's, I look at it from a mathematical standpoint, but you're exactly right. This thing's going to fall in its own footprint.
And Bill, there was recently an article written by Alex Craner about the power behind the throne and the bankers' wars. I want to read this beginning statement to you and then get your take. Recently, former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss gave an eye-opening interview, at least to some, and a revelation, at least to some. Here's what she said, quote, "What I found out when I got to number 10 Downing Street as the Prime Minister, well, I thought that if I got to the top of the tree, I would be able to implement the conservative policies that got me into the office. But what I discovered was that I was not holding the levers of power. The levers were held by the Bank of England, by the Office of Budget Responsibility. They weren't held by the Prime Minister or the Chancellor." She went on to say that, well, you can sack the Prime Minister, but you cannot sack the Bank of England officials who hold the levers of power. Bill, your take.
Really short take. surprise and welcome to the party.
So, Bill, when I surveil the financial landscape, I've come to the conclusion that there are many charges, weapons, explosives that have been put in these financial buildings and are essentially financial weapons of mass destruction. And I'll give you a couple that I've come up with, and then you can add to it or take some off. The list I have of these financial weapons of mass destruction are government puppets that are implementing these fiscally irresponsible policies, bankster puppets such as the Fed and their monetary policies, false data, manipulated data and manipulated markets, debt, DEBT, and derivatives. Am I off?
Yeah, the last two are the mechanics of the operation. They've gotten the system entirely wrapped up in debt, and the average person doesn't even know what a derivative is, but there's over $2 quadrillion worth of derivatives. That will basically allow the powers that be to strip assets from the population. People are going to lose their homes. They're going to lose their cars. They're going to lose their stocks, bonds. And this is through lawfare, if you will, but debt is the reason behind it. And of course, the derivatives wrap up. If you look at the number $2 quadrillion, the world has a GDP of about 100 trillion. So the amount of derivatives outstanding are 20 times the size of the global economy. And when those bets go south, just look at the big U.S. banks. I mean, you're talking banks that hold 50 trillion in derivatives each. So this, like you said, it is a time bomb waiting to go off, and it's going to go off when they want it to go off. They will pull the plug.
And Bill, when we watch financial markets, in particular, we watch them this past week, for example, right? We saw the Fed, group of independent bankers, only caring about bankers, not about the people of this country or the world or the system, announce, well, we're not going to raise rates, and well, we might cut them down in the future. And when Powell made this announcement, right, gold and silver took off to the upside like scalded cats, right?
Yep.
But then they didn't want everybody to go, wait a minute. Whoa, gold and silver are hitting all-time high. I mean, gold in particular hitting all-time high, and silver is starting to move up, starting to break out. So they had to club it like a baby seal in a manipulative fashion. Is that an overstatement?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, I think the best way to look at it is there are no markets per se. The markets are all controlled. They're all painted. And again, they're done so with derivatives. Derivatives price assets. And it's like the tail wagging the dog.
And Bill, a lot has been made about the U.S. dollar and its reserve currency status. There are those that are saying it'll always be the reserve currency of the world. And then there's the camp of which I put me in. It says, not so fast. Part of the deal here is to take the reserve currency of the dollar down. And as you have always outlined, Bill, the cult, the syndicate, the bankster, whatever, criminal group, they always kind of give you a heads up before they pull the plug on something, right? So this week, Morgan Stanley, the financial house, said, quote, consider preparing for a U.S. dollar regime shift that could crash U.S. stocks. Quote, they would go on, a strong U.S. dollar has been a vital, if not overlooked, source of support for U.S. stocks since the 2008 financial crisis. But this could soon change as the greenback dollar enters a prolonged period of weakness, end quote. To me, that's a pretty big heads up. Bill, am I off?
Yeah, it's a big heads up, but really it's the math behind the dollar itself.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm talking about is the U.S. issues the world's reserve currency,
Mm-hmm.
but the U.S. is technically insolvent. Both the Treasury and the Federal Reserve itself is technically insolvent. They lost more on their bond portfolio last year than they had in equity. So you've got a dollar running, basically ruling trade around the world that's a bankrupt entity. That's the problem.
And what could hasten these buildings coming down, Bill, is there's this push. We've heard this through the Biden administration, through the Treasury Secretary Yellen, through the U.S. Congress, and now through the German Chancellor. And this all started in March of 2022, when, as punishment to Russia, $300 billion of their assets were frozen, stolen. And now they're talking, all these entities, about taking those frozen assets and, quote, unlocking them and sending those $300 billion to their pet rat in Ukraine. Now, Bill, since this happened in March of 2022, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now Saudi Arabia as well, and 41 other countries that have lined up, have said, wait a minute, if you're going to do that to a nuclear power, what might you do? It's hastened the, if you will, prominence of this BRICS group and them potentially having a alternative payment system and possible trading currency system, if you will, to the detriment of the dollar. Bill, am I looking at this wrong, that if they actually keep pushing through with this and actually hand over this $300 billion or even the interest on that money or to Ukraine, goodbye dollar?
Yeah, you used the word hasten, and I would insert the word forced. Yeah. The action of the United States sequestering $300 billion, and now Europe talking about how they're going to use those 300 billion Russian dollars, that forces anyone to open their eyes. And when I say anyone, I'm talking countries now. It forces any country to open their eyes as to, hey, if they can do this to Russia, they can do that to us. We need to start to prepare. And these preparations were already occurring, simply because the world does not appreciate the hegemon of the dollar. Capital flowed, from World War II on, capital flowed into the United States because of the rule of law. Now, stealing $300 billion from Russia is a complete breach and eradication of the rule of law. So, you have that mindset that now the United States is lawless, which is stopping capital from flowing into the U.S. And it's, all these countries, all they want to do is they want to trade with a currency that is real and not something that can be used as a club to hit them up, get hit over the head with. They want free and fair trade.
Folks, we're speaking with Bill Holter from BillHolter.com. So, Bill, give us your analysis as it relates to the precious metals markets. You see a lot of this stuff about, X number of tons is moving out of this warehouse to that warehouse, or this of gold, of silver. Bill, how do we really know that? I mean, all this data, all this information is fraudulent. Why are we relying on that this is actually what's occurring? Am I being paranoid about that?
No, not at all. It's all a shell game. Think of it this way, Dave. Just from a broad standpoint, you know that pretty much everything that you're getting out of government is bullshit. I mean, look at inflation, look at unemployment, whatever report actually, in today's world, the easiest way to know if something's not true is if it's something that mainstream media tells you. I mean,
Right.
that's the easiest way to vet something.
Right.
But what I'm getting at is, if everything that they're telling you is a lie, then why would the supplies, the production, anything to do with gold and silver, and for that matter, the amount of gold that the U.S. says they have, why would that be the only thing that's true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I trust nothing out of them. I believe nothing out of them. And so when you look at the precious metals market, Bill, when you look at the precious metal situation, give us what you believe is the current situation with supply, demand, and where we are in the price structure, because now we got a physical exchange in China that is setting a price significantly different than the paper price here in the West.
Right, and setting up that exchange was really smart on their part, because what they're doing is, with gold's got roughly a $50 premium in China, and silver's got call it a $2 premium in China. What that's setting up is an arbitrage where you buy gold from the West, whether it be COMEX or LBMA or Switzerland or whatever. You buy gold in the West, and you have there's a profit motive to ship it to the East. So what that's doing is it's draining the supply in the West. And just this past week, it was announced that China imported something like 80 million ounces of silver in a month.
Mm.
That's call that just a shade under 10% of total global production, and that's just one country in 1 month.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a supply and demand standpoint, we're really close to a tipping point. And I've said all along, I've said for 10 years now, that the absolute end game in gold and silver is a failure to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And once there's a failure to deliver, that means that pretty much every single paper contract outstanding is null and void. Because what will happen is everybody's going to say, hey, I want my gold. And what they've done with the gold and silver markets is they've turned those into a fractional reserve market,
mm-hmm.
where, and it's crazy fractional reserve. It's not 10 to 1. It's 100, 200, 300 to 1. But in a fractional reserve market, if everybody went to the bank to get their money in one day, it can't be done, because the banks, and I mean, this is freely known, the banks take in $1 and they're able to lend out 10. And that's what they've done with gold and silver. And the problem with gold and silver is they can't be printed. They can't be conjured up out of thin air, whereas dollars or euros or yen, at the stroke of a keystroke, they can be created in the billions and trillions. You can't do that with gold and silver. And just one other addition, and this is really the basic of basic. The reason you want to own gold, the reason you want to own silver, is because they cannot default in a world that's defaulting.
And Bill, when you survey the landscape, how close are we to a failure of delivery scenario in gold and in silver?
I think we're really close. I think it could be any of 100 different events that could occur and force a run into the metals. And if you get a massive run into the metals with capital, the metal's it doesn't exist to be purchased. So that will pull back the curtain, and you get to see behind it. There's nothing behind it.
So, Bill, if there was a joint communique issued by Russia and China tonight saying that they were going to move ahead with their payment processing operation with their trading currency, and they were going to back their trading currency in hard assets, such as gold, silver, oil, natural gas. Would that be a scenario that would be the tipping point for this whole manipulated precious metals market to go belly up?
Yeah, if they announced that tonight, I would say by Wednesday, you would have zero ability to buy gold or to buy silver. The supply would be wiped out within 2 days. And we were close to that. We were very close to a failure to deliver this time last year when those 4 banks went down. Mm-hmm. I mean, we went, the supply was incredibly hard to find. I had orders that I couldn't fill because the metal was not available to buy.
And what's the availability today?
On a retail standpoint, the availability is as good as I've seen in many years, and the premiums are as low as I've seen in many years. So from a retail side, the availability is great. The problem is on the institutional side, if you want to move $50 or $100 million, you can't do it.
And Bill, your experience over decades, is the retail market, is it always behind what's really occurring behind the market? In other words, Joe Public, for the most part, and Jane Public are not buying when the big boys behind the curtain are buying. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's a fair assessment, but the world has changed. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, you really didn't have a lot of, if you want to call you didn't have a lot of the family offices. And now the system has gotten so big and there's so much wealth that there's not just the institutional side and the retail side. In between that and a huge player are the family offices. They can move 10, 20, $50 million. In the past, retail investors, once they get a feel of, they get a smell or a sniff that they need to go in a direction, they start moving, and that basically forces, if you got retail buying like crazy or selling like crazy, it's not huge dollars, mm-hmm. but it's a sign of things to come.